Hello and welcome to some Project Kermit unfinished business. So when I rebuilt this Land Rover, I was pretty meticulous about getting every part of it as perfect as possible, except for two major assemblies, the engine and gearbox. Now for those, in the interest of just getting the project moving, keeping the project moving and getting the thing on the road, I just did the best with what I had with the intention of sorting it out later on. For the engine at least, I had a known good one to work with, and that's the engine from my old Range Rover. I do still intend to do a full rebuild, but it can wait for now because this engine's actually fine. But for the gearbox, I had a choice of three complete unknowns, two of which are actually on the bench in the workshop. This is the gearbox that was in Kermit when I got it, not Kermit's original gearbox, and suspected to be quite poor internally, this one. This gearbox, on the other hand, is a complete unknown. It's been lying around here for absolutely years. It belonged to a mate of mine who just left it here. Unknown provenance, unknown internal condition, and yet this one is the one that I'm going to rebuild, but we'll get on to the reason why in a moment. Now just to be clear, when I say gearbox, I'm talking about this little section here. This part here is the bell housing and it's mostly fresh air. All of this section is a transfer box, which is in effect a gearbox all by itself. The transfer box in Kermit is fine. It's something that I did rebuild, and we'll get onto all that in due course. The gearbox I actually fitted to Kermit was one that was a factory rebuild. And because I knew that the series gearbox has been through several different iterations over the years, I assumed that the factory rebuild would incorporate all those improvements. But I was wrong. It turns out there's internal differences in the castings of the gearboxes. And what it means in practice is that you can't just rebuild an early gearbox with the later internal parts. There's a few ways of being able to tell the age of these gearboxes. For instance, here we've got some ribs on the casing and a Leyland logo down there. On this one, we've got no ribs and no logo. So this is an early box, this is a late one. And for more precise dating, there's a number stamped on them, which on this one is here. 904 simply means standard 4-speed box, but more interesting is this one here, suffix D. So this is one of the very last boxes, which has all the improvements in it. So once I learned that the factory recon boxes were built to different specifications depending on their original casing, I went back and dragged this out, which is the transfer box that came with the factory rebuild, and you can see here the original serial number of the box. Now they do obliterate the number as when they recondition it, and there's a new number riveted on there, but you can see on the end here there's an A, so it's a suffix A box. Now bear in mind that at this point the gearbox has been in the truck for a few years, so I've got my money's worth out of it, so to speak, but it has developed to the faults that are inherent with the suffix A models. So it jumps out of second gear, it's got a noisy reverse, and that particular one has broken the synchro between third and fourth. The plan then is to strip down and rebuild this gearbox, and then I'll mate it to the transfer box that's already in Kermit, and that'll give me effectively a brand new gearbox rebuilt to Land Rover's final and best specification. I'm sure a few people are thinking, why didn't I just bin off the series box altogether and fit a 5-speed box from the Defender? And I'll give you a couple of reasons. One is that those boxes themselves aren't perfect. They've got inherent faults themselves. But for two, with the current setup, that's a 4-speed box and a high ratio transfer box and a 200T up front, of course. It's just a really nice drivetrain. I just really like the selection of ratios that I've got. Now, just before I get stuck in, I want to make crystal clear that this video is not intended as a guide to rebuilding gearboxes. And in fact, I've never rebuilt a gearbox before. This will be my first time. If you want a guide, just do what I do and watch the channel Steam Wally. So Phil there has rebuilt a series Land Rover gearbox twice, 2 different gearboxes, and made a fantastic series of videos that goes into excruciating detail on everything, which is what you want if you're in my position. I shall be watching those to learn how to do this. The first step is to remove everything that isn't actually gearbox. So the bell housing here has to go, the handbrake, the speedo drive, and the transfer box here. That actually looks really good. There's no visible wear on any of this so far. Of course, remember this is the transfer boxes section we're working on at the moment, so none of this is actually going to be used, but it's nice to know it's up together. Oh dear. Right, there's no oil came out, there was water came out, and here in the plug is the remains of a synchro spring. I reckon that's what that is. No oil in the main box, just a mug full of water. That doesn't bode well. Anyway, I'll carry on. Special socket time. Bell housing coming off next. So I've got imperial sockets, metric sockets and Whitworth sockets. Because the original gearbox was from the 1930s. Sure, that's not supposed to be loose. I wonder how tight that. A common fault is for this bolt to come loose and then rub on the inside of the casing here, but at least it hasn't done that. Two bearings here that completely seized, which would be replaced anyway. I'm going to take these selectors apart next. The gear stick plugs into these slots here and goes backwards and forth and moves these selectors to choose the gears. So you should be able to wiggle these out somehow. Yeah, they're all fine. It's not supposed to look like that. This is the synchro mechanism that's gone on the one that's in Kermit at the moment, and it's gone on this one as well. Well, at least the spring has failed. There's a tiny spring there and one there, and there isn't one there, but it should be. That's what was in the drain plug. I think these are no good, but only because of the rust. There's no wear or chipping on the teeth. Yeah, rust and chrome. There it is. Just as I was marvelling at how good the condition of the main shaft was, I found a crack in it. I can hardly see it, but I can feel it with my fingernail. And it's just there where my nail is. If I drag the scribe across it, you'll hear a ting when we hit the crack. I can't imagine how that crack occurred there, but clearly that's enough to write off the main shaft. So I'll put that in the scrap pile. So sometimes this bronze bush is supplied as 2 pieces, but never 3. Right, to the fly press. Room in there. So you can see the damage on the reverse gear. That's kind of what I expected the rest of the gears to look like. This one, there is no wear on the teeth at all, but we do have corrosion, so that might have damaged the gear enough to condemn it. See the pitting there? That's really unfortunate. That means this is a write-off. No wear on there at all, but it's ruined. So again, this half of it's clean, and then the other half's been sat in water. Once again, look how rough those teeth are. That's another one gone. So I was about to wrap up the teardown by telling you what I'm going to replace, but it'd be quicker to tell you what I'm going to keep. I'm going to keep the synchros. So I expected to replace these. They're actually perfectly serviceable. I need a new spring for this. Well, I'll replace all the springs in this one. And I'm going to put new balls and springs in the first and second synchro. There's a couple of bits here that are fine, some spacers and bushes and such. The selectors are okay. The casings are okay. Everything else needs replacing. So that's the main shaft, the lay shaft, pinion, and all these gears are in here. I'm going to carefully go through the parts manual and just make sure that I'm ordering all the right stuff for the right age of gearbox that we're working with. Then when all this turns up, we'll put it all back together. Well, as you can tell, I've stripped down the second gearbox. That's all that remains of it. Partly just out of curiosity, and I wanted to see what the condition was like inside. So I've discovered this is a suffix C. These are the innards. This is the suffix D. This is the suffix C, the one I've just pulled apart. And they do look very similar, but they're not identical. In fact, there are no interchangeable parts as far as I can tell. The lay shaft is the uprated type, but it has a different tooth count on this one, on first gear. And a slightly different profile on the end. So that's the bad news. The good news is that these parts are really, really nice. So this whole set, I'll be quite happy to just put back into use. The only reason I'm not going to put all this together and put it in Kermit is because these gears from the gearbox that we tore down first, the suffix D, these are stronger. Well, they're supposed to be stronger. They're also a slightly different profile. So these are the ECM gears, these are called. And the different profile is supposed to keep the gears in gear, stop them jumping out of gear on the overrun. So I'll still be rebuilding this lot and putting it in Kermit, but I'm going to rebuild this box as it is. I'm just going to put new gaskets, new bearings and new seals in it, but put these gears back as they are, and then that will be the spare box, just in case something goes catastrophically wrong with this one. I was going to treat myself to a new gear stick, but then I thought I'll have a quick look in the stores. Turns out I've got, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. This one, the broken one, is a Series 2. The rest is Series 3. This was the one that was on the gearbox, and it's been shortened, I think. Yeah. So I won't use that. This one's missing a bush off the bottom. I think I'm going to go with this one, or maybe this one. No, this one. I've heard lots of horror stories about these breaking in use. I'm going to put a bead of weld around there, and then I'm going to anneal it. Get to all that in a bit. I've been having a ponder at how these are constructed. All of this lot is obviously turned on a lathe, but this I think is a separate piece. So they turn this on the lathe, drill a hole in the end, put in a steel rod and just, I reckon, just push it in. It's just pressed into place. But that's why they break just there. My plan is to build up a shoulder of weld, so I'll go around it a few times, make a sort of a fillet, I suppose is the word. I've read this was standard practice in at least some military units. Yeah, there we go. So that's a much smoother transition for one thing, but also a lot more material holding that together. Finally cooled right down, and I need it to go right down to room temperature because I'm going to put some grease on it, and I don't want the grease to just run off again. So I've cleaned up the spring that was inside, got a washer and a clip. That's it, done. So quite a fun little side quest there. We now have a fully refurbished gear stick. That came out so nicely, I'm tempted to do another one. Cool. Got some old petrol here. I wouldn't want to put it for an engine, but it's going to be perfect for cleaning. As you can see, parts have arrived. I've got a whole table full of parts now, between what was in the gearbox and the new stuff. Most of this arrived in one box, which cost £970. That's from Blanchard's. I've still got another box coming, which is 400 and something pounds, but this is enough to get us started. In addition, this was separate. This was £100, and this was separate. That was another £100 plus VAT plus delivery. That's a re-engineered, so this is a brand new version of the bronze bush, the one that's notorious for breaking. I'll talk about that when we come to fit it. Now, of course, as with everything on Project Kermit, this is all paid for with my own money. There's no sponsorship or anything like that involved. And if you're wondering how I could afford it all, I sold my old Land Rover, so the 2A is gone. It's gone to a new home. Where possible, I've gone for genuine parts, which is actually pretty rare now. And then I've gone for OEM, and then lastly, just generic Brit part stuff. So for instance, got these little springs. These are OEM. This pinion and gear, this is bear mark, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. Some of it is old new stock. So some of it is very old new stock. So these bearings, for instance, made in Czechoslovakia. CSSR, so that's Czech's Soviet Socialist Republic. So that probably places this bearing, what, somewhere in the mid-80s, I guess. Whereas the other bearing's brand new, so a right old mix. Install this. I don't quite have room on the press to install the pinion. Good. So I'm hammering on the inner race of the bearing, so I'm not, yes. I'll put a bit of oil on that bearing. I need to put a clip on there to retain that, and a frost washer. Now, there's a choice of several, and basically got to put it on so that when the clip goes on, there's no play. This is the thinnest washer on first. Yeah, so we'll try this one. That is slightly better. Yeah, go with that. Good. Time for the Czechoslovakian bearing to go in. These are the lock tabs in here. I'm just crimping them in place. That's it for the bell housing for now. That's as far as we can go with that. So I'll put that somewhere safe. So now I've got to extract this bearing housing, which I should have done before really. Put the bearing in it and then put it back, but with some special compound. This is the stuff, so Loctite 601 as per the manual. This is brake cleaner that I'm using to clean everything. It's, I think, just mostly alcohol. Oil seal next. Jointing compound. This is the one recommended by Steam Wally, so that's what I'm going to use. Next step is to put in the lay shaft bearing, which is another one of these. This is the old one. The new one is in tomorrow's delivery, so that'll have to wait. And I don't want to put this in the meantime because we might have to heat up the rear of the casing here. And if I've just glued this in place, then that will disrupt the glue. So we'll put this to one side. There's still a bit I can get on with. We can fit these synchro springs. Looking in here. So the synchronizers are one of the few bits I didn't buy new ones of, because these are perfectly fine except one of the springs has gone in here. So I've got a new set of springs for this one, and we've got some bits and bobs to go in this one as well. So these are the springs, tiny little leaf springs. Let's do these one at a time. It's a very common problem, and it's one of the issues with the gearboxes in Kermit at the moment, is one of these springs has snapped, and that means you can't go from third to fourth without crunching. That's what we're trying to get in, and poke it in there. And then that final step in there, do that. There's two. So get the final one in. Good. So what it's supposed to do is that. Yeah, that's nice. Good, very good. Good. And I've got this one to fix, which is these bits. So now I've got to get these bits into this one, the first and second synchro. Thankfully there is a sequence in the manual for sorting this out. So this is what we've got to do. These two slide together nicely. Now I've got to get these tiny little ball bearings and springs incorporated in there. Tiny ball. That's 2. Oh, great. I've got 2 balls in, 1 to go. They're in. Phew. Good. That was slightly traumatic, but we got there. Right, that's as far as we can go for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow and hopefully the rest of the parts will turn up. It's the next day and the new box has turned up with hopefully the last lot of stuff that I need. So this one was about 400 and something pounds. Well, it does include a bit of a treat. As I'm spending so much money on this, I treat myself to this, which is for the transfer box. We'll get to that. This lot came from a company called Series Parts Ltd, and they seem to specialise in new old stock, and it was basically all the stuff that I couldn't get anywhere else. And again, it's a mixture of genuine parts and OEM parts, like this is a bear mark main shaft, the lathe shaft, and a brick part. That's interesting. So this came in a brick part box, but it says on here made in Italy. So this is TAS presumably. So that's an OEM part. So what we need first is that bearing, which is going to be this one. And so this is the rear lay shaft bearing. So at some point this is going to go on here, but first we've got to get the outer race in the case. Right, next up, I think we can put this in. These are man enough. Right, so with that on, we're now on to reverse gear. I had to get a new shaft for this because the old one was pitted. Shaft, there's the reverse gear itself. I'm going to put this tiny roll pin in first, and then the rest of it goes in like that. So a bit of oil on this. And that's it, that's, see there at the back, that's the reverse gear installed. That's good. Onto the lay shaft now, and I'm going to press this bearing into place. And this is the inner race, which goes with the outer race that we just put in the case. We'll put the lay shaft to one side for the moment, and now we're on to the main shaft. This is going to take a lot of test fitting to get these parts to, for instance, these washers come in a whole bunch of slightly different sizes, and you just got to go through and find what fits best. We're also going to be using the bronze bush. This comes in a single or a 2-part, or you can do what I did and spend £100 plus VAT plus delivery on this one, which has been manufactured from an improved type of bronze, so hopefully won't disintegrate like the one that we took out, which is in 3 pieces. I'll leave a link to the place I got this if you want to check out their reasoning for making this, which was enough to convince me to part with the money for that. First thing we've got to do is to get this to the right size. So this is provided slightly oversized, and the idea being that you shave it down to get all the right clearances between the gears. And I'm going to do that by sanding it on this diamond block. So what do we need to do? We need to put that in there. So that's like that. I put a flush wash. I've got a whole about 4 of these in different thicknesses, but for now that one goes on. That goes like that, and then you hear that there's a tiny bit of clearance there. And it's got to be between 0.10 mil and 0.18 mil. And that's currently, well, that's 0.18 going in. And I can just about, I can almost, yeah, I can just about get the 0.2 in there. So I'm going to take that down a bit. Yes, I'll take it down a tiny bit more, I think. 0.13. Yeah, that's well within spec. Good. Next up is third gear goes on. And then another frost washer. And just need to get some. So now it's this gap I'm measuring here. So push down on that, and it's that float there. Yeah, good. Next job is to establish the end float in the bush itself. So this type of washer here is for the top, this type of washer here is for the bottom, and you can see they're in a range of thicknesses. Idea being I can use those different thicknesses of washer to establish the correct amount of end float of this bronze bush. And this is where I'm going to be using the clip that everybody hates so much. And I bought 2 of these so that we can use one to get this end float and then one for final assembly. Okay, so if I put in a slightly fatter washer there, which I've got, that was 325, 327 would be better. Right, so with all those clearances worked out, we can now build this up for real, as it were. And the first thing to do is to get this off. And I've got to install 2 tiny little pegs down here. Now it's time for the slightly bigger one. That's the same both ways, That's it for that end. Okay, and then this way, isn't it? The last thing to check is that, so I'm pushing down on that washer. We'll get this in, then we're good. Yeah. Good, that's that. That way. And like that. There it is. The main shaft is assembled. That was nerve-wracking stuff at times, but we're there. It's the case of taking it steady and watching Steam Wally's video over and over again. Thank you, Phil. Couldn't have done it without you. I do have the manual, but it's so much better when you've got a good video reference as well. Next job is to check the installation of the lathe shaft. It's got to fit with just a tiny bit of movement to it. So once again, we've got a selection of distance pieces here. So I've marked them out where their thickness is, and these go on this end, like so. Got to try out these spaces in turn until we find the one that's best. As expected, with the thickest one of these, there's a gap here. Let's go a medium one then. As far as I can tell, that's fine with that one in there. So this part. So let's put that to one side for now. And we're back onto this. So it's time to get the main shaft inside the box. Take that off for now. And then the rest of this. Currently wrestling with the reverse gear. I'm going to try that again with this gear loose, with first gear loose. Try and hook it over the reverse. Put everything back together. Let's see if there's more clearance. Now I've got to drive it in all the way into the bearing. Biggest socket, so I'm going to put on this end. I need a gasket. Right, so this is another really awkward bit. You've got to offer this up, lift up this gear and sneak the pinion underneath it and drop it all down again. Oh, that's nice and sticky. Good, we're in. Right, let's tighten these up. God, it's heavy. And then on this end we've got the oil catcher to go. Selectors are going in now. So I've cleaned it all up and I've upgraded the seals on here to the later plastic, or maybe they're Teflon, whatever they are. So this is reverse gear. Oh, good. That was fiddly. Selectors are in. That's reverse, first and second, third and fourth, and those are the upgraded seals. These they're little plastic spiral things, and then O-rings behind them. Now we can use the newly installed selectors to select fourth and reverse at the same time, which will lock the box, and then torque up the bolt at that end and the nut at this end. Good. So this one has a locking washer there, so we'll pin those over. So I'll let that off. Hit a snag. These bottom three bolts are, two of them are stripped. Just been in there with a tap to clean them up, and that's been ineffective. So somebody's over tightened them in the past. Let's strip the threads off. So I'm going to have to attempt to repair. If I can't repair it, then this bell housing is scrap. That's going to set me back about half a day. Right. So it's this one and this one. So the closest I've got is going to be these M6s. Now I need to tap it with this. Now it's this, so that's the thread insert tool. And I screw this into here, and if I'm very lucky, we'll end up with an M6 thread, which is not period correct, but awful better than nothing, which is what we had previously. Okay, that's just below flush. Then we've got to knock off the tang. Now we need some M6s to go in there as substitutes for these. M6s. They nip up properly. Good, that's very good. So just to explain what I did there was the damaged thread that was in there in that blind hole, drilled it out with a special drill, cut a new thread with a special tap, and then I screwed one of those into each hole, this bit. So that's got an internal 6mm thread, an M6 thread, and then I could put in 3 replacement bolts, M6 bolts. So that's sorted. Okay, now on to the selectors. Something a bit more chilled, hopefully. If I hadn't been able to fix those threads, then this bell housing would have been a write-off, and so would have, so would half a day's work at least. I think we got away with it. So this kit comes in M6, M8 and M10s. Very useful, very rarely useful, but when it is useful, it absolutely saves the day, as you just saw. So a dab of grease on all these channels, just to help the springs and detent balls and such. Right, let's pop that on. Right then, we are very nearly done. So I've just been using the tap here to clean up these 2 holes where the clutch slave cylinder goes. It's much easier to do it now, of course, than when it's on the vehicle. And I think that just leaves 2 jobs. And one is to fit a gear stick and try it out, and the other is to adjust this, which is the reverse gate. So it's supposed to stop you just going into reverse. It puts a bit of resistance on the lever. So I put new springs on it, and it's got a screw here that we need to adjust once the gear stick's on. This will be the first time trying out the gearbox and the gear stick. That needs to come out. So you can see there, it's easy to go from the first and second where we are now to third and fourth there, but going into reverse, you're up against that gate. Yeah, so the new springs are very stiff on the synchronizer, I can feel that, and they're not covered in oil yet. Well, I mean, they've got a little bit of assembly oil, but not properly flooded in it. But that action, oh, that is so much nicer than what's currently in Kermit. So much nicer. It's blended. Oh, I'm chuffed with that so far. Good. We need to, got a long way to go before we can actually test it and then actually be chuffed with it, but so far that's great. So that's many hours of work and the best part of 1,500 quid spent to end up with something that looks pretty much the same as when we started. But you know, sometimes it's what's inside that counts, isn't it? Like many things, this was a very daunting task because I'd never done anything like this before. But like many things, it wasn't as daunting once you get stuck into it. Having said that, I'm very glad I didn't do this gearbox, the complete rebuild, when I was doing the rebuild of the entire vehicle, because I just didn't have enough mental bandwidth to cope with it back then. Whereas doing it now, I could concentrate fully just on doing this. And I think I've done a good job. But we'll find out, of course, pretty soon when we put it in the truck, and that'll be in part 2. So join me for that. Cheers for now.